Joining me live is Shadow Finance Minister Jane Hume. Jane, good to see you. Thanks for joining us this morning. We are waiting, as we heard from Tom, crucial inflation numbers, but Jim Chalmers says conflict in the Middle East, rising, escalating tensions. Do we risk another spike in inflation? And we need to avoid that. So higher prices for longer, is that what we need to start expecting?
Well, certainly that's what Jim Chalmers will be telling you, because he seems to be very good at pointing the finger to any other factor other than his own economic management. The Coalition have been saying for the last 2 years now that the most important thing that this government can do is bring inflation under control, because that is the only way that we're going to be able to address the cost of living crisis that's facing all Australians right now. And the only way that he can do that is to maintain his own fiscal discipline, rein in that Labor urge to spend more and more, which keeps pushing up that homegrown component of inflation. And let's not forget that economists out there, while they may be pointing to overseas factors, are saying that our inflation crisis in Australia is homegrown. That's why we're not seeing inflation come back to band now until potentially 2026. That's 2 years later than Labor were originally forecasting when they came to government.
The Age front page says 55% of voters say they would struggle to pay for a major expense because their finances are stretched so thin. Labor remaining steady in Newspoll just out today on a two-party preferred, falling in the primary and the reserve poll. What's your take on that ahead of the May budget?
Well, I'm not going to comment on the details of polls. Obviously, the only poll that matters is the one on election day. But what that data is telling us is that the cost of living crisis in Australia is really beginning to bite. And people are now saying, in fact, one of the data points in that Resolve poll was that a quarter of respondents said that the best way that the government could help them is to get inflation and interest rates under control. 1/4 of respondents. They're also saying that their real disposable income is going backwards, and they're feeling that in their hip pocket. In fact, real disposable income's gone back by around 7.5% just in the last 2 years alone. And that's from a combination of high inflation, high interest rates, and higher taxes too. If the government was serious about getting the cost of living under control rather than just messing about at the margins, it would be reining in its urge to spend. It would be getting aggregate demand under control using the public sector side of the books rather than the private sector, rather than relying on the RBA to do all of the heavy lifting with interest rates. That is the only way to sustainably get inflation under control. Getting inflation under control is the only way to get the cost of living crisis under control.
Okay, so resisting the urge to overspend, but a big part of that is providing relief where people need it, and considering people are really struggling at the moment, are you expecting the Albanese government to consider more relief to taxpayers in the upcoming budget, or are inflationary concerns just too great to do it?
I think they've already flagged that they are going to, this is going to be a typical Labor big spending budget. That's already seems to be on the cards. We would be urging the government to resist that temptation, however, because that's simply going to make the problem worse. Anthony Albanese himself has already said that everything that they have done to alleviate the cost of living in the past has been ineffective, which was why he then went to going back on the promise of maintaining the stage 3 tax cuts. Quite frankly, all of those efforts have not played out particularly well for Anthony Albanese or the Labor government, which has demonstrated this natural tendency to go back to what it knows, which is high tax, high spend and an inflationary budget. We would be urging the government to go in a very different direction indeed.